This is a State of Garrisons Part 2. Last week's video was covering the actual pairings, and although I would have liked to have covered the additional portions of being a garrison main, that's going to have to be in this video. So in today's video, we're going to be covering gear, armaments, how to set up pairings, how to set up your garrisons for success, and how to determine how to refill your garrison appropriately with your allies' troops. Without further ado, let's get started. First, let's go over gear. When it comes to gear, you're going to want to stay mostly legendary in almost every case, so we're going to focus on that. So, in the case of cavalry, you have some options. First of all, you want the minimum 2 out of 6. The Wasteland chest piece and the Wasteland boots are the best pieces for their sets, so they're completely worth the build. So you're going to want to stay with those anyway and get that extra health on top of it, so you get a bunch of extra health value on that. After that, you do have some options. In terms of miscellaneous pieces, I like Navarre's Control and Ash of Dawn. They're both excellent options, and they're pretty much must-haves versus the alternative that you have in that spot. Once you get to the helm and the weapon, you can go with the Scene of Conquest items, but I only recommend doing that if you are a Cav player who's going to use them, because the difference is you gain some extra defense and extra attack versus the 20% and 13%, or 11% rather. But alternatively, if you go with the 4 set piece bonus, you do get 3% counterattack damage, which when you're swarmed ends up being about even. And 1v1, it's really not the most detrimental thing versus the massive cost of acquiring them and expertising them. So keep that in mind. If you're not a Cav main, you don't necessarily need to build those two. Focus on 2 out of 6 with the chest and boots minimum. And then if you are not planning on building heavily into cavalry, also build the helm and the weapon and get the 3% counterattack. Next, for infantry, this is a little more open to interpretation because it's just not very solid. Personally, I go 2 out of 6 because I don't need the march speed as a garrison. If you're a field player, you can totally go 4 out of 6 and use the other items in the set, but I'd rather stack the extra 0.5% defense to get an extra 1% defense and then lose out on the march speed, because the march speed is not going to affect my garrison for 99.5% of the time that it's in use. So I'd rather have the extra 1% defense, even if it barely nudges the trade. That being said, it does barely nudge the trade, so if you are a field player that's building garrisons as well, you can absolutely go for the 4 out of 6 with very minimal detriment. Generally speaking, there's no health on the infantry equipment, but you can go to the leadership gear, which I'll cover a little bit later, and get some health there if you'd like. If not, go 2 out of 6 and stack as much of the defense as you can, or 4 out of 6 and get a little bit less defense with the march speed and have a dual threat as a rally or field march as well. Next, for archers, this is honestly the best set in terms of cohesiveness. So you can go for the 4 out of 6 with the Siege and Conquest items. You can go for the full 6 set piece, and that would be perfectly fine as well. I ended up building this march a little bit different, so I'm losing a little bit of the value because I lose out on the 5% health, but I already had some of the items built, and given the fact that there's a lot of gear cost, I haven't been able to fix it. But ideally, optimal build for archers is the full 6 out of 6. And then if you get just the 4, that's also excellent too. And if you can build the Siege and Conquest items just like with the cavalry, that's great, but it's not a game breaker. Lastly, when it comes to leadership gear, you have an interesting spot. Leadership gear gives you slightly less value. For example, the boots are typically 7.5%, you get 6%. So you get a percentage of the total stat that you usually get, but they're for all troops. So this means the more mixed your defense becomes, the better these equipment pieces become. And when you're running anything that's a fully mixed garrison, like Hera Lapu or Hera YSS, these are must-have items because it affects all your troops, and you can truly have a mixed fill that is able to use the leadership gear. An alternative option you have too, I mentioned with the infantry, is to use these health items. So, for example, these 2 health items you could replace on the infantry set, and you get additional 3% defense and 14% attack to replace the defense stats you're getting from those 2 items in the infantry set. So that's something you can consider too. It's a little bit of a niche strategy, but it is great value. Overall, this set is though focused on leadership gear for a fully mixed garrison with Hera. And it's very solid because you get 14% health, 14% defense, and you get 23% attack that's on all units. So, for example, if you're running a cavalry defense that's 70% cavalry, 15 infantry, 15 archers for Hera, you would only get 70% of that 48.5% health on the set that I have. Versus you would get 100% of the 14% health in this case, on top of 100% of the 14% defense, and 100% of the 23% attack. So it is less value, but more broad of a reaction or reach that makes it super viable for mixed defenses in lower seeds. Next, we're on to formations. When it comes to formations, 90% of your defenses are going to be using wedge. Even if you're not a skill damage heavy commander, where you do have some resistances, your primary 1v1 trade is going to be driven by skill damage. Add on the fact that the specialty endgame inscriptions are based around normal damage resistance in some spots, as well as gaining extra damage when you hit certain rage thresholds, which you will hit when you're getting swarmed because your swarm will generate more rage because that's how the garrison tree works. This is generally the way you're going to want to use it. Alternatively, if you have Gorgo, Arch Formation is a big time player too, with a bunch of normal damage. Gorgo Xeno makes the best use of Arch Formation for that reason. Alternatively, you do have some other options. Hollow Square is a big one. If you are using Hera, Hollow Square is the top one for you, especially if you can have another commander or another commander comes out that has shields, because all of Hollow Square's formations are about boosting shields. So this is something that Hera can really take advantage of because of his shield and the fact that he does a lot. Gorgo Hera is a big user of this as well because Gorgo does have a shield below a certain level, and it boosts Hera's shields in the short run, and then in the long run, once Gorgo hits below 50% units, she's also getting a shield. The last one that I will also bring up is that Testudo is an excellent option for Xeno Hera. Testudo boosts shields and healing. So you have the heals of Xeno with the shielding of Hera, and it just gives you a great option. It does also work with Xeno Gorgo, but at that point you're better off using Arch for the higher damage. So if you're using Xeno Hera, using Testudo formation is probably your best option because you get a lot of boosts to healing and to shields. And if you can have a good amount of shield uptime, which you can typically do with Hera, you can get a lot of great value. But that being said, your primary focus is going to be wedge. But either in any way, you're going to want to boost your damage first, all damage, your normal damage next, your skill damage after that, when it comes to any armament stats. And then if you can get any of those, that's great. Damage reductions are also excellent. If you can get health over defense, over attack, of what you want to do, and then talk about stat focus as well on those armaments. The more damage reduction and damage dealt, the better. But if you can only get it down to health, defense, attack, focus on health first, then defense, then attack. Lastly, as we begin to wrap up the more conceptual portion of the setting up pairs, let's talk about troop setups. When it comes to a monotype defense, i.e. all cavalry, all infantry, or all archers, it's pretty straightforward. You want to keep it 100% of whatever your main unit type is. That benefits your gear best, it benefits your armaments and formations best, and it benefits your commanders best. When you start getting into the likes of Eleanor Hera, or Gorgo Hera, or Dido Hera, how do you set up those pairs? Generally speaking, you want to ensure, because the way Hera and Lapu and all these other mixed commanders work, you want to have at least 3 unit types present in your defense. The best way to do that is to ensure that your lead has that. And the best way to do that is to make sure you have sufficient so that as you are taking the chip damage from the rally or from the swarmers, you continually have those units. Generally speaking, when you're taking damage, you want to make sure that even if the garrison's taking the brunt of that, you never drop below 1 of your alternative unit. So if you are a cavalry mixed defense, you want to make sure you have at least 1 archer and 1 infantry. And the more troops you have, the better chance you have to maintain that. But at the same time, you lose out on the bonus from the equipment and armaments. So the general rule I use is 70-15-15. So 70% of my troops are the main troop type. So if I'm using Eleanor Hera, 70% of whatever I'm doing is cavalry. So if I have a 200,000 unit march, 140,000 of them are cavalry. And then just scale it up from there. 15% will be infantry and 15% will be archers. So in that same situation, I'll have 140,000 cavalry, 30,000 infantry, and 30,000 archers. And what this means is even as my troops take damage, or if it takes excessive damage, I ensure I have 3 or more unit types. Because even though I'm missing out on 30% of my units having this bonus, I also now have Hera's bonus guaranteed that gives me 30% less normal damage taken between the base and the 3 different unit types. And playing it this way is the easiest way to ensure it. And of course, if you have a fully mixed garrison, you just do a nice even 33, 33, and 33. Lastly, as we're talking about this, setting up your garrisons for success, ensuring that you have appropriate reinforcements. When you are a garrison and you are running a monotype garrison, some are better than others. For example, if you're running Eleanor and Jan, or Jan Eleanor, you can have as many cavalry as you want, but 1 archer in your defense is not going to ruin your defense. However, the same cannot be said for Gorgo, where you have to have only infantry units in your troop. So keep this in mind when you're playing your defense, because 1 archer or 1 cavalry in an infantry defense can completely throw off the trade. So when you're running that defense, if you want to run Gorgo Zeno, that's pure infantry, you have to police that defense. Markers are a great way to do that. Using the little check mark above your garrison when you are the captain to set it to infantry only is a good way to cut down on that. But you also need to be constantly keeping an eye on that defense, because it can make a huge difference in your trade if a cavalry or archer unit even accidentally slips into the defense. So keep that in mind. When it's mixed, it's a lot more flexible. However, you do need to make sure that you have as much of your main troop type as possible. Like I said with the setting up your pair, your garrison commander's troop is going to set the 3 or more unit types. So your 70-15-15 will set the 3 unit types, and then everybody else should fill as much cavalry as possible, or as much infantry as possible, to make use of your gear, armaments, etc. So keep that in mind. While it's not completely catastrophic in those situations, since you already have mixed units, it can definitely damage your trade a little bit. But with that, we'll wrap up our discussion on the state of garrisons in terms of gear, armaments, etc. While this isn't as specific to the pairings, it's also extremely important, especially for newer garrison players, because these little differences may not seem significant, but they can be a huge difference to the success of your commander. So let me know down in the comments, do you have a specific little trick you use to improve your trades? Do you want to see me cover a topic I might have missed in this video? Let me know down there as well. If you want to see me cover a different topic entirely, that's a great way to let me know too, or join the Discord using the link in the description. But as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield.